From the outside, we were flawless. The kind of family neighbors pointed at when they wanted to believe in fairy tales. 14 years of marriage, a beautiful wife, 2 children who were bright and full of promise, and a home that looked like it was lifted straight out of a magazine. People would tell us at block parties or barbecues, "You're the couple who has it all." And I'll admit, I wore that praise like a badge. I thought I'd built the kind of life people dream about. I was Michael, the architect. My days were spent in the city, sketching out ideas for skyscrapers and urban spaces that would outlive me. I worked long hours, sometimes too long, but I justified it by saying it was for them, for Laura, for Emily, for Noah. The job gave us the kind of life where we didn't have to check price tags, where vacations weren't a luxury but an expectation, where our kids could chase their passions without worrying about cost. Laura was the heart of the home, or at least that's what I believed. She used to be a graphic designer, full of talent and creativity, but after Noah was born, she decided to stay home. "It's better for the kids," she'd said, and I admired her for it. She was charismatic, beautiful, the type of woman who seemed to turn heads even in sweatpants at the grocery store. She kept the house immaculate, tended the rose garden out front, and baked enough to make our kitchen smell like a memory you didn't want to lose. Our children were our pride. Emily, 12, was sharp in a way that surprised me sometimes. She read books well above her age and had that quiet, observant nature that made you feel like she saw more than she said. She was Laura's shadow in some ways but had my tendency to overanalyze. Then there was Noah, 9 years old, pure energy wrapped in skin. He lived for soccer, for practices, for the matches on weekends. His entire world revolved around that game and his coach, Ryan, a man he admired like a second father. And then there was the house. Our 2-story suburban dream with the white picket fence that people still joked about, like it was too perfect to be real. Roses climbed up trellises in the front yard, and the driveway was always swept clean. Inside, family photos lined the walls, vacations at the beach, Christmas mornings with matching pajamas, birthday cakes lit up with candles. We were the family people envied, the one that made others wonder what they were doing wrong. For years, I believed in the illusion. I told myself I'd struck gold in marriage, that my kids were growing up in the most stable environment possible, that my wife was the anchor holding it all together while I worked to build our future. The life we had wasn't just comfortable, it was enviable. But the truth about perfect lives is that they're fragile. They can't stand much weight before cracks start to show. And when they do, you don't always notice them yourself. Sometimes, it takes your children, your own flesh and blood, to see what you refuse to. The first real crack in the picture-perfect frame didn't come from me. It didn't even come from Laura slipping up. It came from Emily, our quiet, thoughtful 12-year-old who usually kept her observations to herself unless she felt they mattered. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at the dining table, flipping through blueprints I'd brought home, while Emily sat across from me, her nose buried in a thick paperback. Laura was out with the girls, or so she had said, and Noah was sprawled on the living room rug with his soccer cards. Out of nowhere, Emily looked up from her book and said in that casual, innocent tone only kids have. "Dad, I saw Mom at the park today with Coach Ryan." They were laughing, but not like normal laughing. It was weird. Different. I remember freezing, pen still in my hand, mid-markup. Her words didn't make sense at first. Ryan? The soccer coach? Sure, Laura talked to him after games, but what could possibly be strange about that? So I asked, carefully, like I didn't want to spook her. Different how? Emily tilted her head, thoughtful in that way she always was. Like when girls laugh at something even when it's not funny. Like the way the girls at school laugh at the popular boys. It was such an oddly mature observation for a 12-year-old that it made me pause. I brushed it off in the moment, told her maybe Mom was just being friendly, but the comment dug its claws into me. It lingered. Later that same week, as we were driving Noah home from practice, he chimed in without realizing he was setting fire to my peace of mind. "Oh, Dad, Mom said not to tell you she was at the park with Coach Ryan. She said you'd get jealous." He said it so innocently, like he was just sharing a fun fact, like telling me what he had for lunch. I almost swerved the car. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wanted to believe in the perfect life, the flawless family portrait, but Emily's sharp eyes and Noah's careless honesty had drawn a line straight through it. I looked at Laura differently after that. I noticed the little things, how quickly she changed the subject when Ryan's name came up, how she overcompensated with a kiss on my cheek when I came home late, how her phone never left her side anymore. The first crack wasn't loud. It didn't shatter the glass. But once you see a fracture, you can't unsee it. And deep down, I knew, no matter how much I wanted to deny it, that glass only breaks one way. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that should have been normal. Pancakes on the stove, Noah running around in his soccer gear even though practice wasn't until the afternoon, and Emily curled up in her usual spot on the couch with a book. Laura had already left the house, saying she was meeting a friend for brunch. I didn't think much of it, until the kids, in their innocent way, started connecting dots that I'd been too blind to notice. Emily looked up from her book and asked, almost absent-mindedly, "Dad, why does Mom keep hanging out with Coach Ryan when Noah's not at practice?" The question caught me so off guard I nearly dropped the spatula. I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emily shrugged, twirling her bookmark between her fingers. "I've seen them at the park a few times. They sit on the bench, talking and laughing. She looks different when she's with him. Like, not Mom different. Like a teenager." Before I could respond, Noah chimed in with all the subtlety of a 9-year-old. "Oh yeah. Mom said not to tell you about it. She said you'd get jealous." The way he said it, so innocent, like it was some silly secret, made my chest tighten. Kids don't filter the way adults do. They don't think about the weight of their words. I forced a smile for them, but my mind was already spiraling. Why would Laura even say that? Why put our kids in the middle of something like this? I brushed it off in front of them, saying maybe Mom and Ryan were just talking about soccer, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't untangle. That day stuck with me. It wasn't just the image of Laura laughing in the park. It was the realization that my children, our children, were noticing something off long before I did. And worse, Laura was dragging them into it, making them complicit in her secrecy. It's one thing to betray your spouse. But to use your own kids as a shield. That's a different kind of cruel. When Michael first began raising gentle questions, Laura's responses were never straightforward. She met every concern with sharp dismissals, often delivered with a tone that suggested he was the unreasonable one. If he asked about her late nights, she would scoff and insist she didn't need to justify her whereabouts. When he hinted at Emily's comment about seeing her with Ryan, she brushed it off with irritation, claiming it was nothing more than casual conversation about practice schedules. Rather than easing Michael's doubts, her explanations always seemed designed to make him doubt himself. She had a way of turning the tables, portraying his inquiries as intrusive and controlling. If he noticed something unusual, like the faint trace of cologne on her clothes, she would snap back that he was imagining things, that his long hours at work had made him paranoid and detached. Each time, the conversation ended the same way, Michael left questioning his own judgment, while Laura carried on as though his concerns were an inconvenience rather than valid. Her words were sharp enough to make him hesitate, but deep down, he knew she was hiding something. The pattern was unmistakable. She didn't just lie, she manipulated the narrative, ensuring that Michael was the one left feeling guilty for even daring to ask. And though he couldn't prove it yet, the cracks were spreading wider, and her excuses were no longer enough to cover them. Michael began to notice the silence between him and Laura stretching into something unnatural. Where once their evenings had been filled with small exchanges about the children's day or mundane household matters, now there was only the sound of utensils scraping against plates or the television murmuring in the background. Laura moved around the house with an energy that felt secretive, as though she were living a life parallel to his, one he was no longer invited into. Her Pilates classes became the centerpiece of her week. They started lasting later and later, sometimes spilling over into the night. She would return home flushed, her skin glowing in a way Michael couldn't attribute to exercise alone. There were faint scents clinging to her clothes, smells that didn't match the lotions or perfumes she owned. Sometimes it was cologne, other times a musky trace that left his chest heavy with unease. Her phone was the most telling change. Once left on counters or tucked into a handbag without thought, it was now treated like contraband. She carried it with her into every room, and even into the bathroom. Notifications no longer lit up the screen for anyone to see, instead, the device vibrated quietly in her palm, her thumb moving swiftly across the glass before sliding it into her pocket. Michael tried to ask harmless questions, slipping curiosity into ordinary conversations, but her responses came sharpened with irritation. She accused him of being paranoid, of mistrusting her after all their years together. The bite in her tone made him retreat, even though his gut told him he was walking deeper into shadows. The children's words haunted him. Emily's sharp, almost casual observation about the park, and Noah's innocent confession about their mother's warning, replayed in his mind during sleepless nights. They were too young to invent such details, too unguarded to understand the weight of what they had revealed. And so, Michael began to feel as though he were the last to know something everyone else had already seen. The doubt festered, stretching across his days at work and his restless hours at home. Blueprints blurred before his eyes, and deadlines slipped, his thoughts always circling back to Laura's unexplained absences, her scent when she returned, the evasive walls she kept erect between them. The perfect life he had once been certain of now trembled under the weight of secrets, and Michael felt himself standing on the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. The day Michael's world shifted began like any other Thursday. He had left the office early under the pretense of catching up on overdue plans at home, though in truth, his exhaustion with unanswered doubts drove him there. The children were at school, the house should have been still and ordinary, yet the air felt charged the moment he stepped through the front door. The silence was heavy, almost unnatural, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sunlight streamed in through the blinds, casting pale bands across the living room, but the house offered no greeting, no sound of Laura moving about, no clatter in the kitchen. For a moment, he allowed himself the fragile hope that perhaps she was simply out, running errands, and that all of his suspicions were nothing more than shadows of his own making. Then, faintly, he heard it, laughter. Not the children's, not the easy sound of Laura humming to herself, but laughter that was low, intimate, and edged with something playful. It floated through the air from the direction of the garage, muffled but undeniable. Michael's body tightened, each step toward the sound heavy, deliberate, as though he were wading through water. His hand grazed the wall for balance, his heart pounding with a rhythm that drowned out rational thought. The closer he came, the clearer the laughter grew, layered with the sound of movement, the faint scrape of fabric, a shuffle, the kind of sounds he couldn't mistake. He paused at the door to the garage, his hand hovering over the handle. The final moments before opening it stretched endlessly, a silent war between denial and certainty. For an instant, he thought of turning back, of leaving, of protecting himself from what waited on the other side. But he knew the truth was already in motion. When he finally pushed the door open, the sight before him confirmed everything the children had unknowingly warned him about. There, in the dim light filtering through the small garage window, Laura sat perched on the hood of his car, her body tangled with another's. Ryan's broad frame was unmistakable, his shirt half pulled over his head, his hands gripping her as if she belonged to him. Laura's legs were wrapped around him, her face tilted back in laughter that died the instant she saw Michael in the doorway. The scene crystallized in his mind with brutal clarity, the betrayal not just of a wife, but of a mother, a woman who had built a home with him and now desecrated it on the very steel of the car he had worked years to afford. In that suspended moment, Michael felt the ground beneath his life tilt, the fragile facade of their marriage collapsing with the weight of undeniable proof. The image in the garage did not fade quickly, it seared itself into Michael's mind, a tableau of betrayal framed in fluorescent light. Laura's startled face twisted into something sharp, her eyes narrowing as though she had been wronged by his intrusion, not the other way around. Ryan, flustered and clumsy, peeled himself away, his half-pulled shirt caught on his elbow as he mumbled something incoherent. He slipped out the side door, leaving the heavy stench of sweat, perfume, and motor oil hanging in the air. Michael stood rooted, unable to move, as if the concrete floor had anchored him to the reality unfolding before him. The details struck him in waves, the way Laura's hair clung to her flushed skin, the red marks on her neck, the crease in his car's hood where her body had pressed too firmly against it. These were not abstract suspicions anymore, not whispers from his children or half-glimpsed oddities. This was proof, ugly and undeniable. The silence after Ryan's exit was suffocating, broken only by Laura pulling her shirt back into place with deliberate slowness. She did not crumble, did not show remorse. Instead, her expression hardened, as if daring him to make sense of what he had just witnessed. It was this defiance, more than the act itself, that cut him deepest. Michael felt his chest tighten as memories collided in his head, Laura kissing him on graduation day, Laura holding Emily for the first time, Laura laughing in the backyard while Noah chased fireflies. All of it twisted now, corrupted by the sight of her with another man, here, in their home, on something he had built with his own hands. The truth was no longer something that crept at the edges of his mind. It was standing before him, undeniable, stripping away every defense he had tried to construct. The discovery was complete, not a suspicion, not a half-truth, but the full unveiling of a betrayal that had been carefully hidden and recklessly lived at the same time. As Laura finally broke the silence, her words came not with apology but with sharpness, already shifting blame, already rewriting the story. But in that moment, Michael barely heard them. All he could register was that the life he thought he knew, the marriage, the trust, the foundation of their family, had fractured beyond repair. When the silence in the garage finally broke, Laura was the first to seize control of the narrative. Her voice carried not remorse, but irritation, as though Michael had interrupted her rather than uncovered her betrayal. She dismissed what he had seen as misunderstood, insisting it was nothing more than a mistake taken out of context. She shifted quickly into accusation, pointing a finger at his long hours, his dedication to the firm, his supposed absence as a husband. Each word was sharpened into a weapon, framing her actions not as choices but as desperate reactions to his failures. She painted herself as neglected, forced into companionship with someone who actually noticed her, someone who didn't disappear into blueprints and deadlines. The contradictions in her story mounted almost immediately. She claimed it was a brief lapse, a one-time mistake, yet also admitted it had gone on for months. She insisted there was no emotional bond, yet described Ryan as supportive in ways Michael had never managed to be. She denied the children had any idea, though Michael knew Emily's wary glances and Noah's naive comments told a different story. Her voice grew cold when she spoke of the children, as if even their involvement was Michael's fault for dragging them into adult problems. She scorned his shock as overreaction, dismissed his questions as pointless, and treated his pain as inconvenient. Where he expected apologies, he found only deflections. Where he longed for truth, he met only carefully woven lies. Michael stood through it all, each sentence striking like a blow. The woman he had loved for 14 years, the mother of his children, twisted every fact into justification, every action into blame redirected at him. What should have been a confession became a performance, rehearsed and venomous, leaving him standing in the wreckage of their life together, with nothing but her scorn to mark the betrayal. That night, after Laura retreated to the guest room, Michael lay in their bed unable to close his eyes. Every tick of the clock seemed to echo louder in the silence. Sleep never came, only the churn of thoughts, each one heavier than the last. His chest felt hollow, as if the air itself had betrayed him. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, seemed suddenly alien, haunted by the shadows of deceit that had unfolded in his own garage. For days, the weight of betrayal followed him like an anchor. At work, he stared blankly at blueprints, unable to focus on lines and numbers that once gave him solace. Colleagues noticed the change, but he brushed them off with weak excuses about deadlines and fatigue. The truth was more unbearable than any professional failure. The foundation of his family had cracked, and he didn't know how to repair it. Nights were the worst. He would toss between memories of Laura's laughter when they first met in college and the mocking echo of her voice justifying her affair. He saw the contrast between the woman who had once traced circles on his palm during late-night talks and the woman who now twisted every fault into his own. The betrayal wasn't just in her body, it was in every lie she had spoken, every manipulation she had carefully threaded into their lives. The children added another layer of torment. Emily grew quiet, watching her parents like a detective piecing together evidence. Her once confident voice had softened into hesitant questions about whether everything was okay. Noah, too young to grasp the gravity, asked when Coach Ryan would be back, if Dad was still mad at Mom, and whether families could fight and still stay together. Each word from them was a knife, a reminder that the wreckage wasn't his alone to bear. Michael couldn't shield them from the storm, the betrayal had already reached their world. He noticed Emily slipping away into her books more than ever, using stories to escape what reality was breaking apart. He caught Noah crying quietly after soccer practice, confused about why his favorite coach no longer came around. These were the consequences Laura dismissed when she coldly insisted the children didn't need to know. But they knew, children always knew. The loneliness sank deeper. Even in rooms full of people, Michael felt unseen. Friends who once envied his perfect marriage now whispered behind sympathetic eyes, as if they had caught wind of what happened. His parents called more often, sensing his distance, but he offered only half-truths. How could he explain the humiliation of walking into his garage and finding the mother of his children in the arms of another man? His emotions shifted wildly. Anger surged in waves, hot and unrelenting, urging him to lash out, to break something, to demand penance. Then came the sorrow, heavy and suffocating, leaving him curled in bed, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Guilt followed close behind, whispering that maybe Laura was right, maybe he had buried himself too deeply in work, maybe this ruin was partly his fault. The contradictions tore at him. It wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about Michael's identity, his sense of self as a husband, a father, a man who believed he had built something unshakable. Betrayal had turned that image to dust, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths. The woman he thought he knew had been capable of lies so intricate they fooled not only him but also the children who trusted her most. Some nights, he walked through the quiet house, stopping at the doorways of his children's rooms. Watching Emily, asleep with her books scattered across the bed, or Noah clutching his soccer ball as if it were a lifeline, he felt both broken and determined. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve the confusion, the whispers, the scars of a family crumbling around them. If he couldn't save his marriage, he needed to find a way to save them. But clarity didn't come quickly. For weeks, Michael wavered, torn between confrontation and avoidance, between clinging to the fragments of family life and tearing down the walls entirely. Laura continued her games, sometimes cold, sometimes dismissive, sometimes pretending everything was normal. Her ability to switch masks only deepened his despair. He realized he wasn't living with a partner anymore, he was living with an adversary, one who thrived on control and manipulation. The emotional spiral was relentless, yet beneath the chaos, something began to stir, resolve. It was faint, fragile, but it grew with every sleepless night, every glance at his children's uncertain eyes, every reminder of the garage scene seared into his memory. Michael knew he couldn't remain in limbo forever. A decision had to come, not just for him, but for Emily and Noah. When the storm inside his head finally began to settle, Michael realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue living in the ruins of his marriage, pretending the cracks weren't there, or he could begin the painful process of rebuilding a life for himself and his children without Laura's shadow looming over them. The clarity came not in a single moment but in fragments, watching Emily hide behind her books, listening to Noah's hesitant questions about whether families could break forever, and noticing the empty, dismissive way Laura interacted with them all. She still played her games, twisting blame, insisting he was the reason she strayed. But Michael no longer absorbed her words like poison. Instead, he began to see her manipulations for what they were, desperate attempts to keep control. One morning, while sipping coffee at the kitchen table, Michael found himself staring out at the rose garden Laura once tended with pride. The roses were wilting now, petals browned at the edges, weeds creeping into the soil. It struck him how perfectly the garden mirrored their marriage, something once vibrant and admired by neighbors, now decayed because the one who promised to nurture it had abandoned her role. He realized he couldn't force life back into something that had been left to rot. The decision came with weight, but also with a surprising sense of peace. He would end the marriage. Not out of anger, but out of necessity, for himself, and for the children who deserved stability. Divorce wasn't a word he ever thought he'd associate with his life, but now it felt less like failure and more like liberation. The weeks that followed were difficult. Conversations with lawyers, discussions about custody, the logistics of dividing a life built over 14 years, it was exhausting. Laura reacted with predictable venom, calling him weak, accusing him of tearing the family apart, when in truth, she had already done that months before. Her bitterness confirmed his choice. He no longer felt the need to defend himself. The children reacted in different ways. Emily, though wounded, seemed to understand more than she let on. One night she hugged him and whispered that she was glad he had seen the truth. Noah struggled, missing both his coach and the illusion of his parents' unity. Michael made it his mission to be present, showing up to every game, standing on the sidelines where Ryan once had, proving to his son that loyalty still existed. Through the pain, Michael found something unexpected: strength. The sleepless nights, the tears behind closed doors, the humiliation of betrayal, each became part of a larger transformation. He began to see that the end of his marriage wasn't the end of him. It was the beginning of a version of himself that was sharper, wiser, and no longer willing to ignore the signs that once slipped past him. Looking back, the greatest tragedy wasn't the affair itself, it was the ripple effect of lies, how they poisoned not just his relationship but the innocence of his children. Yet even that pain carried a lesson: silence and denial allow betrayal to thrive. Truth, however brutal, was the only path forward. Months later, standing in his now quiet home after the dust of legal battles had begun to settle, Michael reflected on the journey. He hadn't just survived betrayal, he had endured it, confronted it, and refused to let it define him. His family would look different now, but different didn't mean broken beyond repair. In his private journal, where he had poured out his sleepless thoughts, he wrote words that felt like both closure and a message to anyone who might one day stumble across them. Betrayal will shake you to your core, but it also strips away illusions. Don't ignore the small signs, even when they come from the mouths of your children. Don't carry blame that isn't yours. And above all, don't let someone else's lies convince you that you're unworthy of honesty, loyalty, and love. Rebuild, even if it means starting from ashes. The truth hurts, but it's the only thing that can set you free. And with that, Michael stepped into his new life, not unscarred, but stronger, and determined that the story of his family would no longer be one of secrecy and betrayal, but of resilience, truth, and the quiet power of starting over.